Arman had built his life from nothing. He was born in a small dusty town where dreams were often buried before they even began. His father was a simple man who worked long hours but never earned enough to give his family comfort. His mother used to tell him that patience and honesty were the only real wealth a person could have. Arman believed her with all his heart. From a young age, he carried responsibilities that most children never understand. He worked after school and saved every small coin he could. He studied under dim lights and dreamed of a life where he would never have to beg fate for mercy. Years passed and his struggle slowly turned into success. He moved to the city with nothing but determination in his chest and fire in his eyes. The city was harsh and unforgiving, but Arman refused to bow down. He worked day and night and slowly built his own business from the ground up. Every deal he made was honest and every promise he gave was fulfilled. People began to trust him and his name started to carry respect. By the age of 30, Arman had achieved what many only dream about. He had a successful company, a beautiful house, and a life that seemed perfect from the outside. But the most important part of his life was not his success, it was the people he trusted. At the center of his world stood Samir, his childhood best friend. Samir had been with him since the days when they had nothing. They had shared hunger, laughter, and dreams together. Arman never once doubted Samir because he believed that some bonds were unbreakable. And then there was Hania, his wife. She entered his life like a soft light that filled all the empty spaces inside him. Arman loved her deeply and trusted her completely. He believed she was his peace, his home, and his forever. His life felt complete because he had everything he ever wanted: success, loyalty, and love. But sometimes life hides its darkest storms behind the brightest skies. One evening, Arman decided to leave work early. He wanted to surprise Hania because he had been busy for days and missed her smile. He bought fresh flowers on his way home and imagined the happiness on her face. His heart felt light and calm as he drove back, thinking about the simple joy he was about to create. But the moment he reached home, something felt strange. The door was slightly open and a faint sound of laughter came from inside. At first he smiled because he thought Hania might be talking to someone on the phone. But as he stepped closer, the laughter became clearer and more familiar. His heart suddenly felt uneasy without any clear reason. He pushed the door open slowly and walked inside. What he saw in that moment shattered his entire existence. Samir and Hania were standing together in a way that needed no explanation. It was not a misunderstanding, and it was not something that could be ignored. It was betrayal in its purest form. Arman stood frozen as if time had stopped around him. The flowers slipped from his hand and fell silently to the floor. His heart did not race, it simply went numb. Eyes, and no one cared enough to uncover it. Within weeks, Arman lost his company, his house, and his identity. The home he built was no longer his, and the office he created now belonged to the man who betrayed him. Even the people he helped turned their backs on him because they feared being dragged into his downfall. Arman found himself completely alone in a world he once ruled. Every memory became a reminder of what he had lost. Every corner of the city echoed with his past but offered no place in his present. Nights became longer and heavier as he struggled to sleep. His mind replayed the same moment again and again, the laughter, the betrayal, the silence. He questioned himself again and again, wondering where he went wrong. But deep inside he knew the truth, that he was not weak, he was just too trusting. The pain slowly turned into something colder, something sharper. It was no longer just heartbreak, it was realization. Arman understood that the world does not break people without reason, it reveals their true faces. Samir was never the friend he believed in, and Hania was never the love he imagined. The life he lost was built on illusions, and those illusions had finally shattered. One night as he sat alone in the darkness, he made a silent decision. He would not beg for justice, and he would not chase sympathy. He would disappear not as a defeated man, but as someone preparing for something greater. The world thought he was finished, but Arman knew his story was not over. Losing everything had not destroyed him, it had awakened him. And in that moment of complete emptiness, a new version of Arman was born. A version that would never trust blindly, never forgive easily, and never lose again. After losing the outside world, but he still had control over the man he could become. That thought became the first step in his transformation. He found a small town far away from the chaos of the city, where no one knew his name or his past. There he rented a tiny room with cracked walls and a single window that let in just enough light to remind him that a new day still existed. Life was simple and harsh, but it was honest. Arman took small jobs to survive and never complained about the struggle, because he had already faced a loss greater than poverty. Every morning he woke up before sunrise and forced himself to move forward even when his heart felt heavy. He worked at construction sites, carried heavy loads, and spent long hours doing tasks that once seemed unimaginable for someone of his status. But instead of feeling ashamed, he felt grounded. The struggle reminded him of where he started and gave him a strange sense of strength. During the day he worked to survive, and during the night he worked to rebuild his mind. He began reading books about business, law, psychology, and human behavior. He wanted to understand not just how to succeed, but how people think when they choose betrayal over loyalty. He studied patterns of greed and the ways trust can be manipulated. Each page he read felt like a piece of a puzzle coming together. He realized that Samir did not win because he was smarter, he won because Arman trusted without questioning. That lesson burned deeply into his mind and reshaped the way he saw the world. Arman also began observing people around him in the small town. He noticed how desperation changes decisions and how ambition can turn into selfishness when not controlled. He listened more than he spoke and learned more than he showed. His silence became his power, because no one could predict a man who revealed nothing. Months passed and the broken man slowly started fading away. In his place emerged someone stronger, calmer, and more aware. The pain did not disappear, but it transformed into something useful. It became fuel that pushed him forward instead of holding him back. Arman started saving every bit of money he earned and invested it carefully in small opportunities. He made connections quietly and built relationships based on mutual benefit instead of blind trust. Every step he took was calculated and every decision was made with patience. He no longer believed in quick success because he understood that real power is built slowly and silently. As time went on, Arman began to expand his efforts. He took risks but never without preparation. He entered small business deals and learned from every mistake about causing pain, it is about restoring balance. As his strength grew, his vision became clearer. He no longer saw himself as a victim but as a man in control of his future. The world that once pushed him down was no longer his enemy, it was his battlefield. And this time he was prepared. The quiet town that became his hiding place slowly turned into the foundation of his comeback. The man who arrived there broken and lost was now leaving with purpose and power. Arman had rebuilt himself piece by piece, stronger than before and sharper than ever. The darkness that once surrounded him had become his greatest live in luxury, but the cracks in their life were beginning to appear. Arman watched from a distance as the very mistakes Samir made started to expose him. He studied every move his enemies made, carefully planning his next steps with precision. The first strike came subtly as a key deal Samir was counting on collapsed unexpectedly. Investors withdrew and contracts failed not because of luck but because of carefully orchestrated maneuvers by Arman. Legal issues began to surface regarding past transactions that Samir thought were secure. Authorities started investigating discrepancies that Arman had uncovered in silence. Each setback weakened Samir and heightened Arman's advantage without revealing his hand. Arman also approached competitors and formed strategic alliances that increased his influence while Samir remained unaware. Every partnership he made was calculated to undermine Samir's position slowly and without suspicion. Hania began to notice that her luxurious life was no longer secure. Her anxiety grew as she realized the foundation of her world was unstable. She could feel the change but could not understand the cause. Samir, on the other hand, was becoming desperate. The once confident man now made mistakes driven by panic and fear. He trusted advisors blindly and ignored warning signs that were visible to Arman. Every decision Samir made played into Arman's carefully laid plan. The difference was that Arman did not act out of anger but out of calculated patience. He remembered the pain of betrayal and used it as a tool to sharpen his strategies. He observed human behavior closely, understanding how desperation and fear can cloud judgment. Arman set traps that appeared ordinary but were powerful enough to dismantle the empire Samir had built on stolen foundations. Small financial disruptions turned into larger setbacks and legal complications began stacking up. Competitors and investors who once ignored Arman now found themselves influenced by his quiet authority. The city started to notice that Samir's empire was not as stable as it seemed. Rumors and doubts began spreading as Arman skillfully manipulated situations without revealing himself. Each day brought Samir closer to instability while Arman gained control in shadows. Hania's attempts to stabilize their life failed because she underestimated the reach and patience of the man she had betrayed. She began feeling regret but could not act decisively to repair what was being undone. Meanwhile, Arman remained calm and composed, never letting emotions interfere with his calculated actions. He waited for the perfect moment to reveal himself when the impact would be most powerful. He understood that revenge is not chaos but orchestration of events that restores balance. Every action taken by Arman was measured and deliberate, designed to maximize the effect on those who had destroyed him. Slowly the net closed around Samir as legal pressure, financial loss, and public scrutiny intensified. His confidence shattered and the arrogance that had blinded him now became his weakness. Arman's strategy exploited every mistake without being seen. By the time Samir realized that someone was orchestrating his downfall, it was too late to reverse the damage. Arman had rebuilt his empire quietly and positioned himself perfectly to reclaim what was stolen. He had learned that patience and observation are more powerful than brute force or anger. The man who was once betrayed now held every advantage over the one who betrayed him. And as Arman prepared to reveal his true identity, he felt no hatred, only the satisfaction of justice executed with precision. His patience had turned into power and his pain had transformed into a weapon more effective than any confrontation. Arman's return was imminent and unstoppable because he had mastered the art of timing and strategy. The city remained unaware of the storm about to arrive because Arman had learned to move like a shadow. Hania and Samir could feel change but could not anticipate the force that was about to confront them. Arman had become a silent storm, building momentum over 2 years that no one could see. Every decision he had made and every lesson he had learned was culminating into the moment where he would reclaim his life. The stakes were higher than ever, but Arman was prepared. He was no longer the man who trusted blindly and lost everything. He had become someone whose control over events was absolute. Nothing in the city could withstand the precision of his plan. The mistakes of the past were erased by his preparation and patience. Each setback Samir faced was a reflection of his own greed and arrogance, carefully guided by Arman. Arman's quiet observation allowed him to strike when the effect would be most devastating. He did not seek chaos or vengeance for its own sake, but restoration of the balance he had lost. The city was about to witness the return of a man thought defeated but in truth reborn and unstoppable. The patience, strategy, and silence had prepared him to take control without risking failure. As the first cracks appeared in Samir's empire, Arman remained unseen, smiling quietly at the inevitability of his plan. And he knew the final confrontation was near because every step had led to this point and every piece was in place for his return. Arman finally decided that the time had come to reveal himself. He had spent 2 long years preparing for this exact moment. Every move Samir had made, every careless decision, had been observed and calculated against. Arman returned to the city with a calm confidence that masked the storm within him. He walked the streets he once owned without hesitation and felt the power that came from patience and preparation. People did not recognize him, and that gave him an advantage that he would use fully. His first step was to re-enter the business world under his new identity. He built alliances with former competitors of Samir quietly, ensuring that every action would undermine Samir's authority. Every deal he facilitated was strategic, designed to weaken Samir financially and politically. Legal audits were carefully instigated through channels Samir trusted, creating pressure that seemed coincidental but was carefully orchestrated. Hania and Samir began to feel the shift in power but could not identify the source. Arman's moves were invisible yet devastating, dismantling the empire built on betrayal. Each setback for Samir was a reflection of his arrogance and the mistakes he had made while believing Arman was gone forever. Investors pulled out, contracts failed, and partnerships crumbled, all following patterns Arman had studied meticulously. Meanwhile, Hania began to realize that the life she had built on deception was crumbling. She felt panic and fear for the first time as luxury and power slipped from her fingers. Samir tried desperately to salvage the situation, but every attempt backfired because Arman had anticipated every response. The calm and collected man who returned was because of his wealth, but because of his strategic brilliance and moral fortitude. He understood that revenge is not destruction alone, but reclaiming control over one's destiny. Samir was left with nothing, learning the painful consequences of greed and betrayal firsthand. Hania's presence in his life ended completely because some relationships cannot survive deception. Arman did not gloat because he had matured. His satisfaction came from the restoration of justice and his own inner peace. He had taken back not only his possessions but also his self-respect and power. Moved forward into a future defined by his own choices and strength.